Hey everybody, Ott DeFoe here, Major League Fishing professional angler. I've been fishing the Bass Pro Tour since 2019, and a big part of my success over my whole career has been crankbait fishing. I love to fish a crankbait. I even have built crankbaits in my garage, for a number of years and helped design some baits for Rapala. But I love to fish a crankbait. It's something that I've always done, and East Tennessee is known for. East Tennessee is known for balsa wood crankbaits, a lot of homemade crankbaits there in the region that I'm from. And my love for fishing a crankbait goes way back. The first 5-pound bass I ever caught, the first 7-pound bass I ever caught were on crankbaits, namely a shad rap. But those big fish, that I caught early on in my fishing career, being on a crankbait just helped grow my love for them. And where I live, even still to this day, crankbaits win a lot of tournaments in the region of the country where I'm from. So my love of crankbaits goes really deep and has a lot of folds to it. Having fished a crankbait from the time that I was really young all the way into my professional career, I've learned a lot about them, and I feel like I've got a decent amount of knowledge that I can share with you. And we're going to start off with some of the very, very basics and really, talk about different attributes of a crankbait, some of the physical makeup and what that does to the bait. And so when you go to the store, you go to Bass Pro, and you're trying to pick out a crankbait for any situation, you're going to make a more educated decision just based on some of those attributes of a crankbait. So the lineups I've got right here, I'm going to go with the smallest, shallowest one I've got, as well as the deepest one that I've got right here handy. Obviously there are smaller than this one, and they are much bigger than this one. But if you look at some of the differences in these baits, obviously a larger body on that DT10, a larger bill on that DT10 than on that OG Tiny. Much smaller bait, much smaller bill there on the front of it. And then another more subtle difference that you'll see is that the line tie is actually in the bait on that OG Tiny, where it's out in the bill on that DT10. Okay, so let's jump to that DT10 first. Big bodied bait, the bill is right straight out the nose, and that bill being right straight out the nose is going to help that bait dive deeper. Anytime you see a crankbait that has the line tie out in the bill and that bill straight out, you want to think that this is going to be a deeper diving bait than one that has a more turned down lip to it. So if you're looking for a bait that's going to get maximum depth, look for something with that more straight bill. And then the fact that bill kind of widens, you can see that it's not just the same width all the way out, it actually gets wider out here out on the end. That helps act like a spoon and helps catch more water and helps that bait to dive a little bit deeper. And then, just a final, pretty simple thing with a lot of crankbaits is just looking at how heavy they are. So any crankbait, regardless of its shape and size, the longer you cast it out and retrieve that bait back, the deeper that bait's going to get. So a bait that casts a lot further, if you took half the weight out of this bait, that bait's not going to go as deep because you're not going to be able to cast it as far. It's very simple, very simple as far as that goes. But then you look like that OG Tiny, the lip is turned down on that bait, the line tie being up in the body. Both of those are going to help that bait run shallower. And then the fact that the lip is just that much smaller. It's just a real small bodied, or a real small lip. If you compare that to this bait, the exact same body, okay, but you can see that lip goes straight out. It's a little bit longer, nearly double the length. That bait runs considerably deeper than that one does. So just a few of the mechanics with the crankbait: bill angle, bill shape, bill size, all those have a lot to do with it. And most baits out there are going to be one of two. They're either going to be a round bill, like that one. There are some what's called a coffin bill crankbaits, but it's either going to be a round bill or a square bill crankbait. A square bill is known for being really good fishing around cover. It helps deflect off of it, and it will sometimes make the bait a little bit more erratic. And there's definitely times when you're bouncing off a cover that a square bill is going to be the better bait for the job. Again, because of its deflection properties and its ability to not get hung as often as some round billed baits will, that helps it come through cover more and helps you, be able to fish that bait more efficiently in and around cover without getting hung. But square bill crankbaits generally are known to be used in and around cover as kind of one of their primary applications. One of the other really, key things to look at, I guess you would say, with a crankbait, shape-wise, is the actual, design of the bait. So like that OG Slim, that's a flat-sided crankbait. The sides on that bait literally are flat. Where you take something like a DT6, this is more of a round-bodied bait. And even that Rocco, that square bill, definitely, basically a round-bodied crankbait. And what that does, it just really changes how it moves the water, just kind of the water displacement and stuff. Generally speaking, flat-sided crankbaits are better in cooler water temperatures. Sub 60 degrees, something, from 60 degrees down is generally speaking where your flat-sided baits are better. There's exceptions to every rule in bass fishing. Won a tournament on this bait partially in May in Florida where the water was up in the upper 70s. So there's always exceptions, but generally speaking, more round-bodied baits are better in warmer water temperatures. Flat-sided baits generally are better in lower water temperatures. Basically, for all my crankbait fishing, I use two almost identical setups. It's just the length is a little bit different. For the bigger baits, like the DT10, DT14, 16, 20, that kind of stuff, I'm going to use a little bit longer rod and make sure I've got a really deep spool of line spooled up on the reel on that one. But for me, I like a medium heavy action and a composite type rod. I want a rod that's a very parabolic kind of bend, not a real fast action rod, is what I use for my crankbaits. And that whole system between the rod, the reel, the line, and actually the hooks on the crankbait is just a system that works really, really well for me. The way I fight the fish and that kind of stuff between the VMC hybrid treble paired with this rod, this reel, this line, it works well for me. It's a system that I don't lose a lot of fish on. That's something that you hear a lot of people talk about with treble hook baits in general, is that they don't have a high landing percentage. I have a pretty high landing percentage with a crankbait. I give credit to the whole system that I use to do that. But for me, that Bass Pro cranking stick, that's my rod of choice, either a 7-foot medium heavy for anything that's sub DT10, DT6, DT8, or shallower. But when I step up to a DT10 or deeper, so more of your mid to deep diving crankbaits, that's what I'm gonna go with the 7.6. It's just a longer rod. I can cast the bait further, has a little more power to it. 6/8 to 1 speed reel is what I like for all my crankbait fishing, whether that's in that carbon light casting reel or in the Johnny Moore Signature Series, the Platinum Signature Series reel, either one of those. And then 12 and 14 pound fluorocarbon line. I use the XPS fluorocarbon, but 12 or 14 pound, I love fluorocarbon for fishing a crankbait. It does have a little bit of stretch to it, but it has more sensitivity than monofilament. Monofilament does last longer, but again, that whole system that I use works really well with fluorocarbon. I think with monofilament, it has so much stretch, so much give, that there would be fish that I wouldn't get the hook into, with monofilament line. So that's kind of my setup as far as that goes. And that 6/8 to 1, the nice thing with that, whether it's a shallow bait, a deep bait, I know the speed that I'm fishing that reel. I don't change gear ratios, based on any depth of crankbait that I'm using. It's always on a 6/8 to 1, and that's a good speed reel for me. A lot of guys like a slower reel, and some guys use a faster one. But for me personally, that 6/8 to 1 is my gear ratio. I guess kind of one of the last things to touch on crankbaits is colors. You've got every color under the sun available to you out there, and different, different size crankbaits, different color, all that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, most of our fisheries in the bulk of the country, in my opinion, one of the main things you're trying to imitate with a crankbait most of the time is a bait fish, is probably a shad of some type. So those shad type patterns, a lot of your white kind of stuff, even your pale chartreuses, in my opinion, do a really good job of imitating shad, or even brim or something, some type of bluegill or some other type of bait fish. That's kind of what that color I think is supposed to imitate, is some kind of bluegill or bait fish. But I catch a lot of fish in the wintertime, early in the spring on, more on crawdad type colors. Your reds, your oranges, those type of colors seem to really produce well early in the year. And is it actually because that looks like a crawdad? Maybe. Or is it just because that's what the fish are seeing and that's what a lot of people are throwing? Definitely a little bit of that going on. So, but early in the year, man, it is hard to beat a red crankbait. There's no doubt that fish eat them early in the season, and that is the time of year when crawfish are first starting to come out and stuff. So I do think that plays into it a little bit. But one thing that is for sure, if you know those fish are feeding on bait fish, something that has a reflective type property to it. I mean, that green gizzard color, it actually has some full underneath of it that produces more of a flash even than a white does. That, for me, I catch a lot of fish on, especially if the water is fairly clear. So. I think starting off with a crankbait, people are like, oh man, it's an idiot bait. You just chunk it out and reel it in. You can catch a lot of fish like that. There's no doubt about it. It's a nice thing about a crankbait is it's something you can give a novice angler, say, hey, tie this on, take it out, throw it out, and reel it back. You really don't have to do a lot to it to catch fish, and you can be successful with that. But adding a little bit to your retrieve where, number one, you're making sure that you're making bottom contact or at least cover contact for some point of the retrieve. That's really important. And that's as much about varying the speed and varying the direction of the bait. You make the bait, when it contacts something, it kind of shimmies to one side or the other, and it makes it, irregular. That's a big part of that. You can do that with just the rod and the reel. As you're reeling that bait along, you stop it, you kind of work the reel handle erratically a little bit. And I've caught a lot of fish where my bait was not contacting anything else, and just a little rod movement, a little reel, irregularities will get those fish to bite. So always keep that in mind. And then a big thing is in warmer water, is speed is your friend. That's something that is probably one of the biggest things I see a lot of anglers not taking advantage of, is they think with a crankbait, the bait, they feel the bait, they can feel it wiggling. They're like, oh, man, I don't, the water's 60 degrees, it's kind of cold. I need to give these fish time to find my bait. That's really not the case. Once that water, low water temperatures in the 40s, up into the low 50s, yeah, being a little bit more slow, more methodical, absolutely is what you need to do. That water gets mid 50s, 60 degrees or above, you truly cannot keep your bait away from a fish if it wants to eat it. And, especially you get to summertime water temperatures, I think it would really, really surprise people just how fast I fish a crankbait most of the time. And that's something, again, that I see a lot of people not taking advantage of and not catching fish because of. There's times when fish are really biting a crankbait and people are not catching them because they're just fishing the bait too slow. So definitely warmer water temperatures, speed that bait up, and you will catch more fish and probably bigger ones because of it. So hopefully that helps you understand a little bit about crankbaits and help you to be a better crankbait fisherman out there on the water. Get you a good crankbait set up. That's a great thing with it. You don't need 6 different rod and reel combinations. 1 or 2 will cover your crankbait fishing, and you can get out there and get you a selection of them, and from shallow to deep you'll be covered. Go out there and go crank them up.